In case you don't know me, I'm Associate Vice President of Research, and my appointment is in biological science. I was director of the Institute of Molecular Biophysics for about 8 years, and then became a fallen angel, or evolved to a lower form of life, depending upon how you view it. I became an Associate Vice President. I'm a creature of the NSF. I had 31 years of continuous support, and I know NSF fairly well. It's evolved a little bit, but not very much. It is a unique funding agency because I think, by and large, every time you apply, you're sort of laying your life on the line. And the reason why that's true is because there's such turnover of the staff at NSF. And a lot of the staff are rotators, and as a consequence, your proposal stands for itself, and there's not as much institutional memory as there would be, say, at the National Institutes of Health, or the Department of Energy, or any of the DoD funding agencies. So why NSF Career? Well, NSF Career is important to you, to your department, and to the university. Why is it important to you? It has a lot of cachet to it. Not a heck of a lot of money. It's almost like a starter grant. But at the same time, it kind of prepares you in a pathway for a future funding of research. How many of you are just out of a postdoc, or been fairly recently been out of a postdoc? I don't know about you, but when I came out of my postdoc, I was very, very, very focused on a particular project. And I had no conception of where I was going to be in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 15 years. I was very, very focused. I want to get this project underway. I want to get myself funded. I want to get some students. I want to teach, survive. The career actually is kind of cool because it's intended to make you sit back a little bit and think about the future. You don't have a lot of page room to develop a heavy-duty project with lots and lots of detail. You have to kind of project out for the future, and I think that's very, very healthy. So think about, where do I want to be in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, next 15 years? How is that going to integrate with my teaching and all the other things that I'm doing? So if anything, writing a career proposal is a healthy exercise in introspection. Okay. The second good thing for you is that if you get a career, and this year, FSU is on trajectory to having a record number of career awardees, much thanks to the help of the Office of Proposal Development team. It's 5 years of support, and it carries you over that boundary line between being an assistant professor and an associate professor. So it's very, very helpful in that regard. And thirdly, in a very crass way, when you get a career award, you get an automatic pay increase of $5,000 to your base. $5,000. Okay, that doesn't sound like a lot, but it really is a lot. And that's compounded over time, because when you do get promoted to associate professor, you get a 12% pay increase, and so that 5%, $5,000 adds to it. Why is it good for your department? Well, as I said, there's some cachet to having career awards. And departments that have a high percentage, a high number of people with career awards are viewed as being strong departments. And so I think it's good for your department. And your department, in fact, should be invested in you succeeding in your career proposal. And lastly, the university is always in this ranking competition. And so we're constantly being scrutinized in terms of the performance of the university in aggregate and the performance of our faculty. And one of the things that is monitored nationally is the number of career awards at a particular institution. And it's reported in this publication called TARU, the Top American Research Universities. It comes out of Arizona State University. And so not only are we invested in you succeeding, because it's good for you and it's good for your department. If you succeed, it's good for the university. So it's slightly over 4 months away from target date. Is that right?
July.
Yeah, so I think I counted my months right. Please start now. Please find mentors. please find people to vet your proposals. They don't have to be here. They can be back where you got your PhD or where you did your postdoc. Please work with Beth and the people in her office. They're very, very helpful. Their job is to help you succeed. So I hope you find the workshop helpful today. And if you have any questions about NSF or about how our office operates, you can find me fairly easily. And some of you know me, actually, like this one.
Okay, I'm going to quickly do an overview of the program. Okay, I'm going to go through this real quickly. You can follow along if you want in the black folder you have. The information on the right that's things you'll use today. Information on the left is general resources that you can use throughout your writing, just to tell you how we organize this. So I'm going to give you a very quick and basic review, and you'll probably hear some of the same things from everybody over and over, but that's because they're important. So redundancy is to help things stick in your head as you prepare. So first of all, career awards provide the opportunity, like Ross said, for really career development, because unlike most NSF careers that are mostly about your research, this is about integrating your research and your education. And you have to think about that as you're writing, because that integration is a big part of what separates a career from other proposals. It's based on a basic development plan, and basically this is talking about what's going to happen over a 5-year period. So think about that. You're gonna have a 5-year period to talk about in this, and you need to think about that as you plan and how that builds and what that looks like. Because what they're trying to do is, just like the name is career, this is really to set you on a good footing for your career, not just a project, but your career. Real quick, just to make sure everybody's clear, eligibility, you have to have a doctoral degree in a field supported by NSF. And you know, there are a lot of different directorates, so it can be social behavioral, it's all over the place. You have to be in a tenured track or tenured track equivalent position as an assistant professor. And you have to be untenured until October 1 following the deadline. You can't have a previous career award, and you get 3 shots at career, 3 shots. So something to think about, you have 3 shots. You have basically 5 years before your tenure. So a lot of times people won't apply their first year because they're still gathering data and getting your initial work done. But you can't wait for 3 years, because then you just lost a shot because you get 3 shots. So you really think about that. We don't always push real hard. Now some people come and have more, come with a little more prepared to go, and they'll do it the first year they're here. Some people wait to the 2nd year, a few people wait to the 3rd. But like I said, you don't want to wait too long, because you've got 3 shots prior to tenure. You can submit 1 annually, no more than 3 total. For the budgets, including indirect costs, the total minimum is $400,000 for the 5-year duration, except for bio and director of engineering, also polar programs, and I put that down. But that's a minimum of $500,000. So those are your numbers you're working with. So like Ross said, that's not a lot of money over 5 years, but you have to think about that as you're planning through. And minimum figures represent basically your maximums too. And you can look at, if you go onto NSF, onto the awards report, you can bring up what people have been funded for in your areas, and if you need help learning how to navigate the awards report, we'll be happy to help you. But that can give you an idea of what they've been funding in your areas generally. It might help you figure out your budget. Deadlines this year, you'll have these in your packet, July 18th, 19th, and 20th. Now these are the NSF deadlines. Remember, sponsored research, they have to be a sponsored research 3 days prior to that deadline. So back yourselves up, because that is your true deadline. And that's
3 full working days.
Yes, 3 full working days, not including weekends. So think about that, keep that in mind. The last thing we want to do is have a bunch coming in at the last minute to sponsored research, because they won't have time to check to see if something got missed. they won't have time, to really give a good look at it. They'll just be able to click submit, and you could end up getting disqualified for some reason that would be a real shame, especially for how much effort you're going to put into this. So keep that in mind. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to let Mike Mitchell in my office, he's going to take over and talk to you about the different elements of the proposal. We really want to save a lot of time for you to hear from both our people who've been reviewers for NSF and also for people who've been awardees, because we find that that can be some of the most interesting and productive information you're going to find. So, Mike, from here.
That was much shorter than I expected.
Oh.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Mitchell. I'm the Proposal Development Coordinator at OPD. So while I pull up my presentation, by show of hands, is there anybody here who has never applied to NSF before? Okay, great. So for the rest of you, this might be a little bit of a review, but the way this presentation is structured is if you have no idea where to start, you can take this and just look at it, and it has a basic outline of the different sections that go into an NSF, specifically an NSF career proposal, but you could adapt it to any general NSF proposal. And so, by its nature, it is unfortunately a very much read my slides to you presentation, so I do apologize in advance. But the good news is that you can then take it and look at it afterwards and help it, use it to help you structure your proposal. So generally, with any proposal, we want to be persuasive. Not expository. We want to talk about why we should do this stuff, not what has been done. And then generally try to have a sense of excitement about your research. You want to convey to the reviewers that this is something that you were very much interested in doing and excited about doing, to make them be excited about it as well. So if you can see this, if not, it's on your slides there. This is the general structure of the NSF career proposal. Covering everything from the FSU proposal transmittal form, which is a form that is required by sponsored research when you submit, the cover sheet, project summary, table of contents, which gets generated automatically by NSF's FastLane system, project description, which is what most people think of as the proposal. It's the 15-page document that you're going to spend the vast majority of your time writing. References, your bio sketch, budget and justification, current and pending support, facilities, equipment, and other resources, and then the additional supplementary documents, which include departmental letters of collaboration, which are very important. We'll get to those in a few minutes. Data management plan, and then a postdoc mentoring plan if you have a postdoc funded on your project. So the project summary is kind of the first impression of your research. It's a one-page summary that gets split up into 3 sections. An overview, an intellectual merits section, and a broader impacts section. So intellectual merit is generally the contribution that you're going to make to your field. Broader impacts is the contribution that your research will make to society. It's a self-contained overview. You need to be able to understand everything there is to know about your project by reading this one page. I know, like I said, it's the first impression. Most reviewers will take a look at this first before reading your overall proposal, and most reviewers form an impression of your research, either positive or negative, on the first page, and they'll look for reasons to justify that initial impression as they go throughout the rest of the presentation. This document is also the one that's most likely to be read by the public. So it needs to be written in very general, non-scientific terms if at all possible. No jargon, and also you want to emphasize the applications and the broader impacts perhaps a little bit more than you would in the project description, which is the 15-page document that I just mentioned is what you'll spend the vast majority of your time writing. So it's the general suggested outline, introduction of 1 page, intellectual merits and broader impact statements at the end, just like in the project summary. Background, this is pretty much what you would consider a literature review. Your research activities and your research activities and your education activities, including the broader impacts, the full broader impacts details. And then results of prior NSF funding if you have any. So in the introduction, this is just a general overview of the proposal. What are you doing? That's the most important thing that we can convey in this section. What exactly is your project? And then what are your long-term career goals? Like Ross mentioned, this is a career development type project, so you want to incorporate specific research activities from this career award into your overall career trajectory. And then explain how receiving a career award is going to enable you to meet those long-term career goals. And then also generally, why is the project important? Who cares if we fund this? And what are the very specific research and educational goals of the project? So in the research plan, this is you all are very familiar with how to write a research plan for any kind of project that you would do. So what are your hypotheses? What specific tasks and activities are you planning to do? How are you going to evaluate the success of those activities? How will the work that you conduct here influence other work to be done in the future, both yours and by other researchers? How is it innovative and creative? What is the timeline? And do you have any collaborators? Now with collaborators, because NSF Career is an individual award, you're not allowed to have co-PIs, you're not really allowed to have senior personnel either. So anybody who is going to collaborate with you, you have to be very specific about exactly what they're going to do on your project, and you have to justify it fully within the project description. Then, as we'll get to later, you have to have them submit a letter of collaboration, which follows a very specific format that essentially just says, my name. If a project by your name is funded, you're going to collaborate as described in the project description. You cannot deviate from that structure. The education plan and the broader impacts. So with career, there is a bigger focus on the integration of research and education, more so than there is in other NSF programs. So what are the specific proposed education activities? Who is the audience of those education activities? Is it the general public? Is it high school students, middle school? Is it non-academic professionals in your field? Is it industry? You want to specify who is going to be the audience for your education and outreach activities. How are they integrated with the research? Now that's very much up to you, and depending on what you do in your specific research activities. If no one asks of the panel when they get up here, I will ask them to please describe how they integrated it, because it's very much on a case-by-case basis. Do you have any industrial collaborators? Again, that's a very important broader impact activity. And then how do these education activities fit into your overall educational philosophy? And this is very similar to how will the research activities funded by career fund your research, or enable your research goals, your long-term research goals? How will the education activities enable your long-term educational goals? For the budget justification, the most important thing is to work with the department or college's financial management staff. They will be the ones to really help you put together all the numbers that need to go into this and put them in the proper form to be submitted to NSF. So if it is in your proposal, meaning if it is a task or an activity that is in your proposal, it needs to be in the budget or explain why it is not in the budget. You don't want to have something out there that says, I'm going to do this, but then never talk about it in your budget, because reviewers will ask, well, how are you going to do that? You don't have any money associated with it. Or if you don't put it in the budget, explain, I will not be funding for this because, again, to answer that question. Ask for exactly what you need. Reviewers can tell if you were asking for too much money to try to pad your budget and round out to make a pretty number. And they'll also know if you don't have enough, again, to be able to successfully accomplish all the goals that you set forward. Good.
The size of the award is fixed though, right? So you should try to use, I mean, the minimum and the maximum budget are sort of the same for the career, right? So you should try to hit the number that is given to you, unless I misheard it.
Ross, or...
So you scale the project
Yeah.
to the boundaries of the amount of money you pay.
Not exactly. You don't have to do it exactly. If it comes out exactly to the minimum, people look at it and say, well, this is trimmed to fit the minimum, and you padded it up or something or cut it down. It's better, you typically have about $100,000. Check with your program officer, but you probably can go $100,000 over the minimum. In some cases, maybe $200,000, depending on the area, how wealthy they are. But just try to hit somewhere between those two so that the number comes out as driven by the project rather than driven by the cap.
So we have a career in molecular cellular biosciences that's $780,000 in 5 years. But she's a structural biologist and she requires a lot of supply.
So I think the general theme I heard from both of you then is to contact the program officer.
Definitely. It varies hugely by area, but if you go to social sciences, for example, they're poor, have very little money, and you're probably not going to be able to get much above the minimum out of it. Right? If you go to the engineering and some of the sciences, they have more money, and they're willing to or spend a larger portion of their budget.
Right. So it's a case-by-case thing that you have to talk to the program managers about.
And you can also, again, look at the awards and see what they've been funding in those areas. That can give you some parameters.
So current pending support. If you have received a award from NSF in the past, you have to report what that award was and what you did with it. There is a specific template that you can use that's available either on NSF's website or it's on OPD's NSF Career Toolkit. Very easy, just ask you to talk about the project title, the award amounts, whether you're PI, co-PI, and then a very, very brief intellectual merit and broader impact statement. I'm talking like one sentence at most. The facilities and equipment statement, this is used again to give the reviewers a sense that you have the equipment and facilities and resources necessary to complete the project. Best advice for this is to talk to someone else within your department who has written a similar a proposal to NSF to kind of follow their format and to describe general college and departmental resources. Obviously you want to describe any equipment that's specific to you and your lab. Again, there's an outline available for this on the NSF Career Toolkit, and OPD has links to various departmental college resources on our website as well, which I'll show you at the end of the day. So letters of collaboration, like I mentioned, must follow the very specific format. There's a template available on our website. Also, it's specified within the career program solicitation. It's that one sentence that says, I agree to collaborate as described within the project description. It's very important not to deviate from that structure. That is a hard requirement from NSF. Departmental letter is a little bit different. There is a hard page limit of 2 pages, but it's up to your department chair to describe how you fit within the department, how your goals fit with the department, and how they will support you in your research and educational activities. Data management plan and postdoc mentoring plans. For data management, we recommend contacting Renee Julian in university libraries. He is FSU's data management expert. And a postdoc mentoring plan is only applicable if you fund a postdoc on your project, which, as we've mentioned in past years, the award amounts are relatively small, so it's up to you if you want to fund a postdoc or not. And then the proposal transmittal form is available on Sponsor Research's website. And again, ask your college department staff to help you fill that out. And it's due 3 business days prior to the agency deadline. Any questions? Perfect. I'm over time anyway.
Okay, we're hitting you with a lot very quickly. So I'm glad you're quick learners. I'd like, at this time, we are going to have a reviewer panel. We have 2 NSF past reviewers, program folks. If Dr. Ted Baker, he's behind that podium, and Sachin, Shanbhag. Come up. Yep, right here. Every year that we have done this, we have had a panel of awardees, which we have received very good feedback that hearing from people who've done this before, it has been very positive. But then we were thinking this year, what about some of the folks that have actually reviewed and been part of this at NSF? You know, wouldn't you like to hear from them, because they can tell you the good and the bad and the ugly, what they've seen, what you don't need to do, all those tips that might help make the difference as you're applying. So Dr. Sachin Shanbhag is here. He's Associate Professor in Scientific Computing and the Department of Chemical and Biomedical Engineering, correct? He started FSU in 2006 and is also a career awardee. He has been an NSF reviewer 2009 to present, correct? And we have over here Dr. Ted Baker. Very happy to have him here. He is Professor Emeritus, retired in 2011, from Computer Science. He served as Chair of Computer Science from 98 to 2002. He has been a Program Director for the Division of Computer and Network Systems at NSF, and served 3 years as Program Director, correct?
Yeah, almost 4.
Almost 4. And I know know, both have served on NSF panels. So these are folks you're gonna wanna listen to.
And I've made just funding decisions on career awards, so. I
Yes.
can tell you that.
So this is the time to open your ears, because this is some information you're not gonna get on the career or the NSF website. So we have a few questions we thought we'd start off with, and then we're gonna open it up and let you ask questions and let you talk in general as well. Or would you rather start by giving an intro about information?
The danger if I start talking is that I won't stop.
Okay.
I do have some comments on some of the things that were said earlier. I want to make sure I don't forget to say at some point that sort of additions and change deltas to some of the stuff you saw on the slides,
Okay.
wherever that fits.
Okay, so let me just start off with a question. How do you see the career proposal differing from a standard NSF proposal?
Oh, actually, I had slides on that.
Ah.
Why don't you go first?
Okay, so, I mean, there's a lot that okay, so first let me preface by saying, Ted, you probably have a lot more experience. He's probably seen a lot more proposals. My experience as a writer of career proposals and a reviewer of career proposals has mostly been limited to DMR, CMRT, and some proposals that are sort of more DMR-wide and sort of software type proposals. So I come with a narrower sort of set of experiences. So what's different, in my opinion, about a career proposal is one is it's 5 years compared to 3 for typical proposals. So it's one has to lay out, I think, a slightly wider vision, and unlike typical proposals, it ought to be a pathway through a career. Okay? And people, I mean, understand that you can see 6 months down in greater resolution than 5 years down the line and 20 years down the line. But you start with a plan. I mean, you can modify the plan. And the career, I think, is an opportunity to do that. You sort of lay the foundation for something that is juicy enough to last, a decade or so. Right? I think that's one big way in which a career proposal is different. The second is structure, right? I mean, it's an individual. If one person writes a career proposal, I mean, you can have narrative collaboration, but it's a biography. I mean, it's a one person sort of, it's one person's vision of what a certain area should look like. So that automatic. I mean, just the length, the context that it's got to be sort of long term, and that it's one person's research and educational sort of plan for the career. I think those just automatically make how you write a career proposal somewhat different from how you write other, like a typical research proposal. But there are similarities. Okay, okay. I mean, those are my comments.
I have a lot of information on some slides that I posted. Beth, did you send them the link to that?
We'll be following up
Okay.
and sending them.
When I was in NSF, I had occasion to give a lot of presentations and listen to a lot. So after I left, I took all these various PowerPoints and I combined them into 115 pages or something. Too long to use for a presentation, but sort of just to capture the information, preserve it. If you're interested in that, if you go to that online, there's a section specifically in career near the end. The first part is all about proposals in general, and everything that applies in general, of course, applies to career. But a big difference in career, in terms that was used by George Hazelrig, one of the longtime program managers there, it is a career development award, not a research award. Okay, it's awarded to help you develop your career, not for a research project, which is what normally you describe a project you want to do. This award is supposed to tell a story about you. And so every proposal is a story. It has to be an engaging story. The difference about a career proposal is the focus on the individual rather than just the research project. So you start with your focus on you and work your way into the research you're going to do with the money that you get. But that has to be stated in the context of a broader picture of how you're hoping to develop professionally. Okay, so you start out with this broad view of how you're going to develop professionally, both in education and research. And then you narrow down to what am I going to do with this little bit of money that you're giving me, $100,000 a year or less. which usually means one research assistant and some travel money. Now, so in terms of your career, remember there's the research side is, as you just said, there's a long-term picture of how you're going to develop over 10 years, and you have the short-term picture of 5 years. And for some of you, you may have this picture before. I don't know how many people here come from a well-established research background, either as a postdoc or a non-tenure track faculty member on a research budget somewhere, soft money. Okay, you guys have a special problem because you don't fit the mold. You can ask me later about that if you want, but you need to, the typical model is somebody getting out of graduate school and going into an assistant professor position with very few publications and not an established research program. The danger of people who come, the other category of people is that sometimes you come with a lot of baggage of all the research you've already done and you're trying to figure out how that relates to your career. The big pitfall there is you've got to make sure you make a clean separation. It's really the same thing, I guess, as with a PhD student and their professor. But it's more of a problem if you have an established research career. On the one hand, you want to talk about it enough to show you have credibility, but you have to depart from it for this career proposal. And not only depart from it, but show how over 10 years you're going to evolve from that. Okay, so the educational part. One of the things I wanted to say about the slides earlier, the outline for the summary was missing in an important component. The summary has to have a separate paragraph on your educational goals and programs. You know, there's the broader impacts of intellectual merit, but specifically for career, make sure you have a few sentences. And I have an example here. I think it wouldn't hurt just to read it, since you won't have access to the slides, that George Hazelrig put together of a nice outline of a project summary. If I can just find it here. My research goal is ... fill in the blanks. In pursuit of this goal, the research objective is career proposal is to test the hypothesis, blah, blah, blah. This is the description of the research plan. I'm skipping. Next, my educational goal is fill in the blank. In pursuit of this goal, the educational objectives of this career proposal are fill in the blank. The approach for accomplishing these objectives will be fill in the blank. He didn't put it, but and the approach for assessing these fill in the blank. Don't forget the assessment. So that really ought to be a separate paragraph in there for the career. That's a way it's different from other proposals. It's a pitfall here because you're supposed to be telling this long-term story about your career development, but you have this tiny budget. So it's very important that you separate clearly what came before, preliminary work you might have done on other research projects that's leading into this, and work by other people, clear separation. Your goal for the long term, and then you're narrowing down specifically what you're going to do with this money. It's perfectly understood that you're going to have to get more grants to complete the big picture, right? But you got to make it clear that you're not claiming to do all of this on the grant, or that, put it differently, that you're not specifying which of these multitude of ideas you're actually claiming you're going to do on this grant. You need to be very specific about those ideas, but still sketch out the longer term picture. That means including some room for risk management, in the sense that it's hard to predict how your research is going to evolve over that longer term. So as you get further out, there are more contingencies and it's more ambiguous. But you need to at least give a general picture as to how this little bit of work you're going to do on these 5 years is going to potentially develop into something much bigger. The education plan on this one has to be sound. On other research proposals, some panels and some program officers will ignore the NSF official policy that research and education are equally important. And if you have a strong research proposal, let you off with boilerplate for the educational part. You won't get away with it for career in most directorates. So think hard about the educational development. And this is not educational activities, which was on the slide here. It's education, your development as an educator. Remember the stories about you not about the research specifically, or not about the courses you're going to teach. It's about what you are going to be as a professor in the future. It's best to think in terms of writing yourself a little blurb, like your future bio you're going to write when you want to brag about yourself, describe yourself as you want to be about 10 years from now before you write the proposal. And then keep that in mind as you're writing the proposal. So like, as a researcher, I would like to be recognized within the field of, say, computer science as the guy who knows the most about subject X, or who pioneered the solution to problem Y, okay? It's something that somebody would use introducing you to as a speaker, say. This is what you're well known for. As an educator, you'd like to be able to have a future story. Well, I'm the guy who added a new specialization in our program. I'm the guy who filled in a gap in the curriculum of our department, an important area that really hadn't been taught before. Or I'm the guy who brought in students from this underserved group and showed that we were able to recruit a bunch of them into our program. But you figure out what it is that you think you can do. Look at yourself in the department in terms of the niche you're trying to fill. Hopefully when you were recruited, it was because the department filled a gap. Figure out what it is, and be sure you can coordinate with your department chair on this, because their letter had better back it up. And look around also at the resources, student resources, where the student demands, find unmet needs. Project yourself into that and see your future role. Describe it in a few sentences, and then make sure that the proposal conveys that somehow. Then the rest of it all follows from there. You know, what are you going to do in order to get to that goal? It's not enough to just list, these are the courses I'm going to do. You know, I'm going to develop 3 courses, I'm going to teach a seminar, standard stuff, boilerplate. People read it and they'll say, nothing interesting here. And that's, anyway, that's important. I could go on about that, but I won't. I guess those are the most important things, the way in which it's different. The educational plan, the focus on yourself.
Great.
Yeah.
I think that was a good start. I want to open it up for questions, because I'm sure you have a lot of questions. And as I mentioned, the slides he's talking about, we'll be sending that link to everybody after, so you'll have these to reference as you're going through. Questions? Yes.
I've heard from some people that you have to do a lot of broader impacts before you even start writing a career proposal to have some sort of CV like you have a research CV. Is that right? Or?
I think there's a lot of variability across directorates. I can tell, I only reviewed and managed the review funding of proposals in my division. You know, so and that's the computer network systems within computer and information science and engineering. Actually, I have a pretty good view of the CISE, the larger picture there, but if you get out into areas like other sciences, it's hard for me to say what they expect.
Mm-hmm.
You probably need to talk to a program officer to tune in on your particular area. My own feeling is that you don't necessarily need to have a track record, but you need specific plans with and credibility for those plans. But the credibility can come from things other than a track record. In fact, too many people, I've seen proposals, non-career proposals, turned down because the PI simply bragged about their track record, and it was exactly the same text that was in the last proposal that was funded, and people remembered it and said, sorry, you can't get by with cutting and pasting. You know? Mm-hmm. So credibility and, what's the right word, actionability. You have to say specific things that you plausibly will be able to do with the resources and time available, and specified in enough detail that it's clear you've thought it through to the point where you're ready to proceed and actually do it. So, for example, if you're working, say, I want to work with K-12, well, then you better have a letter from somebody in the public school system you're collaborating with, because you can't just walk into a classroom in the public schools. In fact, recently, as you know, it's gotten harder and harder. Likewise, you know, if you're for any other activity, if you say, oh, I'm going to develop a new major, a new sub-major, a track within our major, undergraduate level, then you better have thought about what resources that requires and get your chair to specifically say they're going to make it X% of your duty assignment for the next 5 years to do that. Again, for credibility.
Mhm.
So the answer, in short, is make it credible, whatever way it takes.
So, I mean, do you mind telling what department you're?
In geoscience.
In what?
In geoscience.
Geosciences. And what sorts of broader impacts would you think, like what sorts of activity?
Outreach websites, going to local schools.
Yeah, so something like a
I'm here to kind of
website.
learn what other people use for broader
I
impacts. 'Cause-
like I want to warn against doing too much of the work even before you turn in the proposal, because then sometimes a reviewer may get the impression this work, he's going to do this regardless of whether
Amen.
he doesn't need that proposal, right? So if you worked in a school environment for 6 years, and you're asking money for the 7th year, that I think it's a less credible
Mhm.
ask than
Okay.
if. Right, so I understand, so you want to balance that. I
Mhm.
don't think you want to do too much
Okay.
impact.
Sure, no laundry list. Don't try to cover every possible thing. Focus on on some things you're really going to do that are going to have some impact. Make sure that you have adequate resources to do them, either out of the grant specifically identified in the budget or from your department. Sorry, there was another thing. Just be very careful about being specific about it, and create it if possible. I'm thinking about a half a dozen different outstanding proposals I've seen over the years. You can't always do that, but if you can, for the educational plan, I remember one, for example, the school was located very close to an American Indian reservation, and the person developed close relationships with the schools on the reservation and actually had a plan, and already one summer had started something, bringing in people from the reservation, trying to get them involved in the science. And in my field, I don't think there's more than one PhD in our field that is from a Native American background. Okay, so this is extremely underrepresented group. And this was plausible because of the location and the prior work the person had done. You can think of other examples. One thing we sure to remember is broader impact. The educational program is one thing, but the broader impact goes way beyond that. The first thing your broader impact always you have to consider is, what is the impact on my actual research going to be, independent of these other activities? Is my research going to have a benefit for society? And you better spell that out, whatever it is. So in geoscience, I can think of possible benefits depending on what you're doing. They might be very important economically or very important environmentally in terms of the well-being of human beings on the planet and the benefits to our economy. And you really want to nail those down and explain your plan for transition of actually your research having an impact on practice, if you can.
Mhm.
So through industry or government groups or getting it out there into practice should be a focus. I think in almost every other research field, it's probably also true though. You can think of some benefit to society, and that should be your number one broader impact before you get into things like reaching out to various student groups and that sort of thing.
How many broader impacts are usually listed? So you said there's one that's kind of the impact to the society, and then would you list maybe 2 more? Because you don't want to have the laundry list, and then how does that compare to the education plan?
Well, the education plan integrates with broader impacts because you have impact through education. That's one of the impacts. But it should be more than the education plan. And I don't know how many of these activities make sense to do. Then you have to look at yourself and your time. Just don't promise to do a lot of things you're not really going to do. That's where you hit the limit. And some people try to make sure they have something graduate level, something at undergraduate level, something at K-12, something for the broader community like science museums and web pages and so forth. And that's fine if you really can do it, but a lot of times it sounds like you're spread too thin and you're not really going to do any of them. Remember, think ahead of your annual reports you're going to be writing each year. really, you ought to have tasks and check-off boxes in your mind at least. You know, next year, I'm going to be able to say I did this, and the year after, I'm going to be able to say I did that, specifically toward these outreach activities or achieving broader impacts. If it's an activity for broader impacts. If you're talking about broader impact in general, as I said earlier, the research itself can have impact without any new activities as long as you promulgate it, disseminate it in a way that people are actually likely to take it and use it. So like interacting with people in industry, going and presenting papers at academic conferences doesn't cut it. That's a no-no. I mean, don't say my broader impact is I'm going to go off and give a talk every year at such and such a conference. That's your research field. That's not broader impact. But if you say, okay, I'm in a field where the automotive industry is interested in what I'm doing, and I have contacts with General Motors and Toyota, and I'm going to go give talks there, well, that may be a broader impact. Or if you're going to, I don't know, in geoscience, who you would talk to, but there ought to be people in government, for example, in connection with the state's Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Protection, that kind of thing. There's ways you could have impact.
I have a simple one for lists. I think you got to do 2 or 3 items. I think that forces you to prioritize, so no laundry lists. And it's not one dangling item. I mean, the list needs 2 at least. It's a 2 or 3. I mean, you may have more than that, but you know, if you have to state it in the summary, state the most important. Right?
Right. The 3 sounds reasonable. Yeah. 1 is too few.
Do you guys want to comment on the tone of the proposals in terms of whether it be at the sea level, 5,000 feet or 10,000 feet? The reason why I bring this up is that I've been on 13 panels, and NSF requires only 3 reviews for a proposal to be acted on. Well, it turns out every panel has 2 panelists that review, the primary and the secondary, and those people generally are generalists because they have to review a whole spectrum of proposals.
Very good point.
And the ad hoc reviewers are the reviewers that are the specialists. Well, the return on ad hocs, oftentimes, depending on the program, is not very good. And those that get returned, oftentimes, are not very good reviews. Therefore, it's the primary and the secondary that provide probably the most thorough reviews that you'll see. And I've been on panels where there were no ad hocs, and I was asked to do a review during the panel session so that there'd be the statutory 3. So as a generalist, as a panelist, when I see a proposal that's written at the sea level, I don't have a clue. You know, I end up going to the PubMed and so forth and reading the papers and trying to navigate what they're talking about. So I think it's important to be at the 5,000 foot level rather than down at sea level in terms of the tone of what you're writing.
You start out at that level.
Yeah, and I don't know, is that your experience?
Yeah, but you also brought up something else. Each of the directorates and the divisions has a slightly different review process. You need to talk to the program officers to add to whatever we're telling you. For example, in my division, we use exclusively panels. And we assign 3 or 4 reviewers on the panel. But what you said is still mostly true. We don't use ad hoc reviewers partly for the 2 reasons you said. 1, you can't count on getting the bag. Number 2, they have no context. Ad hoc reviewers are a real crapshoot. Some people think they have very high standards and will shoot down everything you send out. It's nothing but criticisms. Other people will be sympathetic and be really easy on proposals. And as a program manager, you get these reviews back, you don't know how to calibrate them. On a panel, everybody is exchanging information back and forth, and there's a sort of self-calibration process that goes on. The people that were harsh initially may soften when they hear other people praising the proposal and vice versa. So pray that you get on a panel rather than ad hoc reviewers, because the random effects are much reduced by this panel interaction.
But the good part of it is you don't see the other panelist reviews or the ad hoc reviews until you've submitted your review.
Yeah.
And then in the panel session, generally it's a really good.
Except there are guys who cheat, okay? There's a whole lot of unstated things. There are these nasty panelists who'll go in and submit a null review so they can read the other reviews, okay? And there are people who won't read the proposal until they're on the plane coming, you know, things like that. And while the panel meeting's going on, they're trying to enter their reviews and not listening to what's going on. They're bad panelists, and just hope you don't get them. But the panel process generally is better, I think.
So in DMR, there are certain sections where there is no panel review, it's just ad hoc, and I'm the program manager. Where actually, I mean, so I submitted there, and I can, so I'll tell you my experience, right? So I wrote in fairly early on, so I hadn't written too many proposals or read too many proposals when I first submitted. Getting a so all I knew, all I was trained in was in writing papers, right? And you write papers for an expert audience. And if you get I mean, you can get, there are two sorts of harsh reviews. There can be a harsh review from somebody who sort of has understood what you're trying to say. There can be a harsh review from somebody who has no clue what you're trying to say. When you're writing a paper, the latter, so a harsh review from somebody who has no clue, I mean, you can forcefully address that. In a proposal, you don't have that chance. You don't have that chance. Unlike a panel where it's sort of a weighted average, because hopefully in the panel, the people who sort of understood your proposal the best champion the proposal during the panel process, and so it's a weighted average in the panel. Whereas in an ad hoc, it's like a simple average, right? So those are the facts on the ground. Right? The question is, how do you respond to, depending on how your division judges proposals, how do you react to that? So if you're in a division like mine, which mostly relies on ad hoc sort of reviews, it really means you've got to play good defense, right? So you want to try and get enough hooks, essentially like what Ross was saying, right? So you want to make your proposal appeal to people who may not know too much in that area, right? It's always hard. It's never easy to do that, but being cognizant of that sort of helps, right? So you want to, so depending on somebody, whether they're in the domain, but maybe they're purely experimental, and what you do is mostly theory or computations, you want them to be able to sort of hook into your proposal at different points, and they may not be able to read it at the same level that somebody sort of in the centroid of your domain would be able to do. But you got to make it that much better. That's what I mean by playing defense, right? So you want to make sure that your worst review is not terrible, right? So sort of maximizing your minimum.
Another dimension of variability across the divisions is how harsh they are. Multiple areas. I've seen certain divisions where the program manager is really a program manager, and you have one person who has a pot of money, and they basically are making the decisions. And others where you have groups, we call them clusters or program managers, that act as a committee. In the case where you have one person, whether it be career or otherwise, there's a tendency to have a much more closed mind about what they're going to fund. The program officer has their own research agenda, their plan, master plan, sort of like your career plan, of where they want to see the research going. And they actually will choose to boost certain people because they want to see that research done, and they have the discretion to do that. In other areas is a consensus process among several people, and it's more the merit of the proposal, and there's more openness to new ideas. For non-career proposals, I've seen certain cases where a program manager has a reputation for saving all their money for their stable of favorite PIs who are doing great work, and they want to make sure they have continued funding so they won't stop producing good work. And they're very reluctant to bring in and fund new people. In other areas, I've seen where people are very skeptical about people who had a lot of funding for years and years and like to give money to new people. Okay? So these are things you need to talk to program officers in the area that you're going to be submitting, or maybe if you have multiple areas you can submit, something we haven't talked about, try different program officers to see which area you should target. Yeah.
Will your program officer actually come forward in such?
No,
I'm a kingmaker, or I'm
no,
not a kingmaker?
no.
How do you really find
And then this is one of the things I wouldn't, it's not on my slides, I wouldn't put in writing, and I've been in trouble with some of my friends. Okay. But it's one of the dirty secrets at NSF is that there are some kingmakers.
Can you
And-
comment on the
But you can
current-
find out a little bit by talking to them about your ideas and the feedback they give you. They won't tell you that I'll fund this, but they can tell you whether what you're proposing fits in their program, is a conceptual fit for their program. You can also maybe find out the rate at which they fund career proposals. In my division, most of the years I was there, our funding level ran from about 20 to 27% for career proposals. I was told of other divisions where it was as low as 3%. So they won't tell you those numbers, and I was never allowed to put them on slides for any program, the funding rate. But you may get a feeling, if they tell you, oh, careers are very competitive, that means low percentages, right? Or they might be willing to tell you, we put a lot of emphasis on career awards in our program. You may be able to get some feedback at that level. And you may get some also by looking at the NSF website and doing a search on career and your program to see about how many they award each year. The smaller the number, the more the program officer is probably going to have a role in.
But engineering as a directorate, I think, is higher than any of the other.
That's right, engineering, and that includes computer science, yeah.
So, would you encourage the faculty to contact the program officer before they even start to write to
Yes.
make sure, and what does that
Okay.
look like?
I will probably forget to say some important things, but I won't read. Okay. Contact the program officer before you have started to write the proposal. At the point where you still have maybe 2 or 3 different ideas, if you have multiple ideas, that you're trying to choose between even in terms of focus for your proposal. Ask them what their minimum, their range of funding levels is for these proposals. Try to get them to indicate whether what you're proposing is appropriate for their program, or if not, what other program they recommend you submit it to. See if you can find out, if they'll tell you what their typical review process is, as Ross brought up. Do they use ad hoc reviews, do they use a panel? They really ought to tell you that. There are probably some other things that are important that I'm not thinking of. Can you think of more? I mean, there's things you don't ask them. Don't give them, never send them a full proposal. Never send them a description of your research more than a page, okay? It's preferably a paragraph of the idea that you have. Never carry on multiple conversations with separate program officers without telling them about it, wasting people's time asking the same question. If you're going to ask a question of multiple program officers, it's probably better to CC or address the email to all of them at once so that they'll see each other's replies and not waste their time giving you duplicate replies. Don't try to make an appointment with the program officer to go and visit them unless, I would say unless you're going to be in DC anyway for some reason. Do consider making a phone call, using an email to request an appointment for a phone conversation, because they will tell you stuff on the phone that they can't put in email. Yeah.
What is it? There are times in which program officers don't want to be disturbed. That's immediately after a panel, I guess. Are there better times in the seasons of program officers?
Remember that the summer is budget closeout time for NSF. And certain programs are always running behind schedule. As in, you need to find out. Like the CPS program that I was in was I became persona non grata with some of the administrators because I kept complaining that I wanted to get our solicitation out earlier by skipping revision of solicitation 1 year. And made it, NSF doesn't like squeaky wheels internally. But that was my squeak on the wheel, because every year they would be busy revising the solicitation, they'd postpone it until after they made all the awards, and then they wouldn't get the solicitation out in time, and then and everything was always behind schedule. So we'd always be, our crunch was always running panels during the summer at the same time you're trying to do budget closeout, which is absolutely the worst case scenario. But the typical times, okay, in the fall, there's nothing going on typically when the budget year has closed out in a fiscal year, which is October 1st, right? My right is October 31st. Which one is it now? End of October, end of September. But anyway, that rough time frame, they can't spend money, and there's not much going on at NSF.
Well, this year they can't spend money now either.
That's right. If they're on a continuing resolution, there's a limit. Let me mention that too. There's a limit how much they can spend. If your proposal is submitted and you heard nothing back, whether it be career or otherwise, this could be good news. The general practice is because of government requirements, they need to respond to most people quickly, so they're going to decline all the clear declines right away. They will make a few funding decisions based on their partial budget, if their continuing resolution budget, they have one. And they will hold a few strong proposals in reserve in case they get additional funding later in the year. They may not be, this is the kind of thing, if you have a submitted proposal and you heard other people got results back and you haven't, you might call the program officer and they might be honest with you and say, I'm holding your proposal to see if I can fund it.
For example, this year, we have 4 that have been told they're being funded. We have 3 that haven't heard anything, so we're keeping our fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So another thing I would say is, if you're not submitting your career fairly early on, maybe you should volunteer to receive for whoever might be your program manager or whatever division that is.
Yeah.
Because that's a good way of sort of seeing how the division operates, right? Especially if you can serve on a panel.
Yeah.
It also gives you a chance, sort of, I mean, when people attach a face, it often makes a difference. Maybe it shouldn't, but it does.
Because you can't go in and expect to persuade by force of personality anyone to give you money, but it helps.
Right, my point was more like you could ask these questions and you could actually see a few things about how the program manager operates, just by observing, just by being in a room and seeing how.
The Department, you're right. Like I've heard program officers during the funding process say, oh, this guy is really bright. He was on my panel. He's great. Okay, yeah, it's a little. It's a nice
unfair in a certain sense, yeah. But
so the kind of comments you make about other proposals, if they're constructive and they show that you're well informed, actually leave a lasting impression on the people. So try to get on panels. You can't be on a panel for a program you've submitted to. So whenever you're not submitting, contact the program officer for the program you might submit to in the future. Contact them just about the time of the closing date for the submissions for that program, when they're starting to do the panel formation or the reviewer selection process. And volunteer yourself. Say, I'd really like to serve on a panel, please keep me in mind. But remember, the career panels are a little different, as Ross was saying. When you have for the people that do panel reviews, the panel formation is a clustering process. You get a whole bunch of proposals spanning the spectrum of ideas, and you try to cluster ones that are similar enough together to form a critical size for a panel. And that often works pretty well in specialized programs, but for career, they're so broad and the numbers are sufficiently small that they're not clustered very tightly. And when you're trying to bring in reviewers to make sure you have at least 3 for each proposal, inevitably, the number of experts in your area that read your proposal is going to be lower than a normal research proposal. They are probably more senior people, though. They probably had a broader experience. So you're more likely to see associate and full professors on these panels and newbies coming in on the panels for other programs. But that's not entirely true. Again, if your program officer will tell you, there are some programs that actually allow assistant professors to serve on career panels, even people that never received a career award. Some programs prefer to populate the panels with people who have just recently received a career award. That's another possibility. So again, this is the kind of information you may be able to get out of the program officer. Call them on the phone. Yeah.
So some programs have special career panels. Other programs actually have careers evaluated in the context of the regular proposals.
That's true too.
And so that puts a special challenge to the panel because even though you're looking at quality, there's quite a bit of difference in terms of the detail you'll see in the regular proposals versus the proposals you see for
You
careers.
really need to contact someone to get this
Yeah.
information so you know how to write your proposal to have the best chance.
And so one thing that was useful to me was, so I wrote my career proposal fairly early on. So I hadn't written too many proposals before that. Is to see a lot of proposals, just to read a lot of proposals, I think helps. I mean, now, Beth probably has a collection of successful career awards here. But I think it's worthwhile to read unsuccessful career awards too, just because there are so many ways to skin the cat, right? You get a lot of advice, and you'll see a lot of proposals in the unsuccessful bin, which are sort of ticked on all the advice, and a lot of proposals in the successful bin, which haven't ticked. There's a huge diversity in the proposal, and just being cognizant of that, I think helps. Sort of reading widely, and so I don't think of myself as a good proposal writer, but I've always felt if you read enough and if you practice, you can get better than you were before.
Yes.
There's a part of it that's a skill, which can be trained.
And to that, our office has a database of successful proposals, and at least for the past 5 years or so, we have all of the proposals that have been funded on our website. So you can look at successful proposals. And I'm guessing there's some folks probably in your areas that have been unsuccessful that might be willing to share their unsuccessful proposals, like you said. One thing we've talked about we would like to try to get is maybe somebody that applied 3 times and see this and the comments and this and the comments and then the hit. I think that would be interesting to see. We've talked about trying to find that.
The 3 times is, that's worth discussing a little bit more. In my experience, in my area at least, there was such a backlog of demand for submissions of career proposals that it was rare for anything to get funded before the 3rd try. Just because there were so many people who were making their 3rd try who had benefited from all the feedback of the reviews they had gotten on prior proposals, that they had polished up their proposals very nicely. And the first people making their 1st try were competing against those who had the advantage of all of this feedback. Don't give up and do benefit from feedback. That also means think hard about changing your proposal drastically from the 1st to the 2nd try if your reviews were mainly positive. But be skeptical when you read the reviews, though. Remember that a lot of reviewers and most panel summaries are going to pull their punches with negative comments and couch them in ways that are polite. And this is another place where if you submitted one before and it wasn't funded, make sure you talk to the program officer and find if they're willing to help you read between the lines of the written comments you got back. Because there's always 2 ways of saying things. Like the example that I often use is one person is straightforward of a proposal and says, this proposal has no new ideas. The PI doesn't know what he's doing. Okay. The other one says, the proposal could be more original and needs more detail on the research plan. Okay. Same proposal, right? And one person explains boldly why it's negative, and the other one states in a way that sort of tried not to offend anyone, but is still saying the same thing. So sometimes a program officer will help you understand that on the phone. Don't expect anything in writing along that.
Yeah, it says ask for what you need.
Yeah.
So how do you best justify maybe some specialty equipment?
This is going to depend a lot on your area, whether they're amenable to including equipment in a career grant. we were willing to put about 10% of the budget into equipment if it was necessary for the research specific for their project. But a lot of people won't put any money at all into equipment. That's assumed to be something that your university should have provided for you as a part of a startup package or institutional resources. This is not the opportunity to get yourself a new laptop computer. But if there's something very specific that you need for the research that is not something you would expect to be around the university, available, you could share or borrow. You just have to explain why it's necessary, but to keep the amount reasonable. Again, talking to a program officer in the area will help. As I said, some areas are much more amenable to including equipment than others. But really, the canonical career proposal is 1 or 2 research assistants, depending on how cheaply you can get them, and some travel money for yourself, and that's about it.
Any other questions?
Yes. So one question about time. So first year, so I just wonder, should I try the career in the first year together with the CRI at the same time?
Oh, CRI, okay, so you're in an area that has CRI. No, do the CRI first. And that program was created to make it possible for people to submit a proposal in their first year when normally people don't have enough time to develop a proposal. In fact, intended to allow people to submit a proposal in transition, you know, as they're coming into the job, first year there. I really think that career, you could submit it your first year, but you're probably going to have a little better chance of producing a good proposal if you submit it the second year. Unless, if you already have a good idea, a clear picture, and you want that feedback, submit it right away. But don't rush out some half-baked proposal just to meet the deadline and waste your shot and get feedback that's not really very useful to you because it wasn't your best attempt. But don't delay until late either. I mean, by the second year, if you haven't submitted one, I think you're behind schedule.
So maybe CRI first, right? If it is a different name, we can try career. If we reject, can we give this proposal, we can do CRI and go to career?
CRI is a much different proposal. It might be in the same area, and some elements might be similar, but the scale of it is quite different. It's a short-term proposal. It's much more exploratory. Although I haven't, they created CRI the year I left, so I haven't actually reviewed them, so I can't say for certain.
So we have 3 minutes left in this session. Maybe we should spend this time giving these gentlemen time for some closing points that they feel like they really want to convey to you for this session.
So I'll take, I mean, I jotted down a few points which I think are important. So I think one thing you want to sort of ask your proposal once you've written it is, I mean, what's the edge? What's the variant perception? You know, like what is it that you're doing? That is important and different from what other people are doing. And if you can, if you can answer that in a, like a reasonable way, I think you stick with what you have. Two is, I mean, I'm just repeating a point I made, which is and this is again a point that Ross made, which is you write it at a different level than writing a paper. So you write it for a more general audience. When you write a paper, there's a lot of like you write it's very detailed. It's for somebody who could reproduce your sort of your results. Here, it's more show rather than tell. Wherever you can do it. So you say, okay, I'm going to use this method, and I got this. Like you show a preliminary result with a certain method or an algorithm. You don't have to completely specify sort of the details of what you did sort of. I mean, essentially multiple hooks, and then sort of remember that it's long range. It's got to connect to something wider, to a sort of career plan. I realize those are not viewpoints, but I think those are the important things.
a lot of things I could say, but just to repeat a couple of, emphasize a couple of things. Okay, so one, remember to think hard about the educational program. Your program for career development as an educator, as well as a researcher. Remember to, Sachin said, tell us engaging story about yourself that can be understood by everyone from the beginning without jumping down into something that you assume only a specialist in your area would understand. So include plenty of motivation, but you have to achieve the balance. There's this famous Goldilocks principle that applies all across proposals. Never too much of one extreme. You've got to find the middle ground somewhere. Yes, you've got to be able to read through the first 5 pages and understand everything regardless of whether you're a specialist or not. And you have to understand the reasons for everything. But when you get down to specific research tasks, and for the first 2 years, say, of your plan, you better be specific enough that if someone is a specialist in your area reads it, they're going to say, yes, this is feasible, the person has enough background, they know what they're doing, they can get started on this. Okay, so balance it. Oh, and make sure you talk with your department. This thing about 3 days before deadline, at least a week before deadline, probably 2 weeks before the deadline, maybe a month before the deadline, talk to your department chair, explain the overview of what you're trying to do, and get their buy-in to your plan. So that when it comes time for them to write the letter, they're going to integrate what they say about the department supporting you with what you're proposing to do. You don't want to throw your proposal at the department chair and say, write me a letter at the last minute. It's not going to be a good letter. You'll lose some of the potential advantage you could get out of that.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. We really appreciate this. Hope you will stay through the break and later if you like, so people can ask questions. And if you would help me thank them for their time. We're going to take a 10-minute break, get some coffee, get some food. There are restrooms back here. You can go around either way, and we'll get started in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
There you go.
Okay, I think we have most people back. We'll get started. So you've heard from reviewers. Now you're going to hear from some folks that have been awarded. Some, it's been a few years, and some are brand new. I could sit and read this to you, but I think I'm going to let them introduce themselves as we go forward. If you would, let everybody know your name, your department, and a little bit about where you applied to, and did you get it on your first time, your second time, your third time? You can share that with us, and then we'll go from there. Okay, Jonathan?
All right. So my name is Jonathan Clark. I'm with the Department of Mechanical Engineering. My area of research is robotics. I applied through CMMI, and I got on my third try. Slipped in.
And how long
Last
ago,
possible.
when did you get yours?
4 years ago?
4 years. It's gone by so fast.
Too fast.
So you're still doing it? You're still,
Yeah, it's still active.
okay. Daniel?
I'm Daniel Hallinan. I'm in chemical engineering. I work in the area of polymers. I got my career through DMR on my third try. Just got it March 1st. It started, so brand new. Yep, happy to be here.
Everyone, I'm Hanson. I'm in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. I applied to DMR, the energetic and photonic materials. I got it on my third try.
Yeah, my name is Yan Li. I'm from the Department of Chemical and Biomedical Engineering, same department as from Daniel Hallinan. I got last year. My project started last year, April. It's my third try as well. And my program, it is the CBET, it's the BBE, cellular and biochemical engineering.
Great.
I've been trying the same program all the 3 times. I never changed the program.
Did all of you stay in the same program all 3 times?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, but my program officer didn't. It changed twice during that time, actually, so that was interesting.
Okay. So I might ask a couple of questions to begin, and you think of questions you're going to ask them because they were in your place, either last year or a few years ago. So think about this time. Let's see. I have 6 questions, so I'm looking for the best question. Tell me why you applied for a career and how it's helped you.
Do I get to start?
You
Do we
get
get
to
to do
start,
this in sort
yes.
of sequential order here? I think we should roll dice or something, or roll tempo. So let's see, why did I apply to Career Award? Because it's a fantastic program. It's, among other things, a lot of the funding for the robotics that I do is applied in nature. So a lot of funding comes through the DoD, and they're wanting to have us have deliverables where we build things, which I love to do. But there's, well, you always have a basic research component to that. The nice thing about the NSF is it allowed me to do 2 things. One is to focus on the fundamental aspects of what I was interested in doing. And 2, it allowed me to choose topics that were really central to what I felt was the career thrust that I was going. A lot of the programs I applied for otherwise always had a bit of a tangential. They had some flavor that they wanted, and so they wrote a proposal to address that. But the great advantage of the career was it allowed me to do something that was central to what I felt was the heart of the research direction that I wanted to go on over a number of years. So those are the 2, I think, big advantages of career.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, there aren't many programs that will fund you for 5 years, and research in its nature is a long-term endeavor. And so I think that is the single most motivating factor for applying for an NSF Career Award. It's just the practical, benefit of being guaranteed 5 years funding. I think there are other significant benefits. So there's a certain prestige associated with it that I think if you get a career award, it increases your credibility with reviewers. Not that they're not taking their review of any proposal seriously. They do take, I think, all reviewers I've interacted with take review of proposals seriously. But I think that you have to work less hard to prove to them that you have the capability to do what you're proposing. Once you get your name known in the field, and so I think at least in the polymer program in DMR, there are some of the senior professors in polymers are the ones who review the proposals, and so they get to know. I'm pretty sure they got to know my name and they got to know my work just by reviewing my proposals. So even the act of applying, I think the years that I didn't get it had some benefit as well. So that's 2.
My answer is much less glamorous. I apply for any and everything I can fit into. I mean, to be realistic about grants, it's a war of attrition. I mean, top 20% of grants are indistinguishable, right? You just roll the dice on what's better than the other one. So at some points, it's just statistics, right? Apply for as much as possible. I mean, like these guys said, career's nice because it's 5 years and there's prestige associated with it, but I'll take any money I can get.
Well, he said what I want to say. I also want to take any money I can get. And so you have to find any opportunity you have. I think the career is a little bit, I think you want to start some things like who are you competing with? You want to compete with somebody, where you are competitive. So career, I'm not sure they're shy on that, but because you are relatively junior, so you do not want to compete with very, very senior people. So that's a very good platform for you. And also you give you a lot to think about what you want to do because 5 years is long. You have to think about a more longer term rather than the specific project, even if you have to start with a specific project. But basically your chair will tell you you need to apply. So.
Your chair told you needed to apply. I wouldn't be surprised if all of you are hearing that from your chair. So I have one more question before I open it up. All of you are third timers? Okay. what do you think helped you, or what happened between the first one and the third one that you think it hit on the third one?
I think there's a combination of factors, so I don't want to steal all the good answers, just kidding. But one is I got better between the first year I wrote it and the third year I wrote it. I think the biggest difference was the first year I wrote what I thought was a good proposal. The second year I got feedback and I sort of corrected and maybe overcorrected. And the third year I sort of was able to hone in on what was actually made a really good proposal. The other mistake that I made that it took me 2 years to figure out is I wrote a proposal that was at an interface between two areas. My core area, which was dynamic systems, and I happened to be some smart materials work that I was doing. And I thought it was a really exciting interface between the two, and there's lots of possibilities, and I was really excited, and I wrote the proposal. And the committee came back the second time, it was really clear, and they didn't get the stuff that I was describing out of the area. It was out of their area, and they weren't able to assess it properly. And they're like, I don't know that you're going to be able to succeed. And I had all this stuff in here, and I thought I had addressed those questions from the first year, but they just didn't get it. So third year, I'm like, all right, bad idea, cut out that, focus on the stuff that's core to both my work and to the committee of people who are going to be reviewing me. So I cut out the smart materials stuff, concentrated on the dynamics, and all of those weaknesses disappeared. That may have helped.
Okay.
My answer is very similar. Maybe I'll give a little bit different perspective on this. Very, very similar. There was this pendulum from first time not having much data, second time it was just too dense, and then third time I kind of zoned in on what was unique to what I wanted to do, what set it apart, and really told the story and sold it well. So definitely my proposal writing skill improved dramatically. But the perspective I think that I'd like to share is that I had some really deep arguments with myself about how to change it and how to go about changing it, and to the extremes of, I thought about throwing it out altogether and proposing a completely different topic versus just augmenting what I had. And in the end, I ended up making major changes to it, but sort of keeping the core that I had first thought was this is really how I wanted to find my career and to be known in the field, and that I thought was exciting and I was passionate about it. And so I stuck with that core, and I think that in the end that was a good decision. I mean, it turned out to work for me. So.
I have no idea. I'm going to be honest, I'm a little bit jaded with the process, and I gave that disclaimer to these guys before accepting it. The reviews on all three cycles were roughly the same. I mean, they focused on different things, but it's not like super positive, super negative or anything. The rankings were very similar, and then the third time I ended up getting it. And so there is a little bit of bias towards third year people going up for tenure. They know they're making decisions about people's careers. That discussion does happen, as I understand it. Also, I mean, I had more preliminary results. I had more backing up, hey, look, I'm a competent person, give me money kind of scenario. And that seemed to work. But yeah, in terms of shaping the proposal, my narrative was roughly the same. The aims changed because I had published the previous aims that they said I couldn't do. So it goes. But yeah, over time I just learned, how to sell it maybe a little bit better. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, for me, I think the idea is getting better the third time. They become sharper and more cutting edge, when the third time. The first time when I write something like materials and some metabolism, and they actually rated very low, I said, okay, forget about it. And then I actually practice between the career and the regular proposal. And because career, you have 3 shots, so sometimes I get an idea, send the regular proposal. I did not get it, but I can see they like the idea. And then I converted it back. Actually, my career is converted from a regular proposal, which almost found, but did not found. But I know they like the idea. And also the writing, the 3 aims are more coherent because they want to see the integration of those 3 aims. My second try, they feel like there are 2 proposals put together. So there are 2 different aspects. So the third ones, I think that I read the successful proposal before, and some old ones in my field, but the new ones are all from the other field. But from the third one, I asked one particularly from my field. I said, can you share your successful proposal, and it's from John Hopkins. And he willing to, so he gave me the proposal, I look at it, and then I learned the writing style, putting the word like you just put in the word very obviously from the review. The novelty is what, and what's the limitation. You have to identify what's the limitation, what you want to address those. You just put the things from the review. You can write things which use your word.
Yes. And as Jan mentioned, we have examples of successful proposals, but faculty from other schools are surprisingly open to giving you copies of their proposals. I've called people on behalf of faculty and received them, or asked that they send them to the faculty member, and you can go through the awards database and see who's being funded in something very similar.
And those actually public, you can request those information through the NSF. I
Yeah.
got one person from Penn State, from my field. He requested from the NSF, but I actually know him. I said, don't need to request from NSF, I will give it to you. Then but it's public information. You have
Yes.
to request from the sponsor research.
Yes,
Proposals are not public.
No,
Well-
proposals not, but you can request it.
I think they're talking about getting.
NSF does not have permission to distribute.
No, there's FCOA. There's some law you can.
FOIA.
You can't FOIA a proposal unless you really want to pay some serious legal expenses. NSF strictly tries to preserve confidentiality of proposal contents so that no one is going to steal other people's research ideas before they have a chance to actually do the research. This is a high priority for NSF. So if someone succeeds with FOIA, I'd be surprised to actually see a full proposal. But all the time I was there, we were always told to refer them to the PI, because it's copyrighted by the PI, and it's held in confidence by the National Science Foundation. So if someone sent you a proposal from NSF without the PI's permission, I think they did it without knowing that they were violating NSF policy, and maybe they did it. It was wrong, but maybe somebody did it. There's a lot of people make mistakes, and some of the rotators that come in to these positions there do some serious errors. Some of these cost a lot of money, but I don't think people should assume that they can do what you say you agree with.
Oh, okay, sorry, I don't think back.
Well, and from what I've understood, they have released them, but allow the faculty to redact the information first, so they can pull out information. FSU's policy is we don't FOIA. I mean, you can FOIA if you want. The first thing we recommend is go to the faculty member, because you can get bad blood from FOIAing. I mean, it happens. So I would first try to go directly to the faculty member. And when they see you're not trying to steal their research, you just want to see how they wrote, and they can redact whatever they want. You just want to see the flow and how they did it. Most of them are pretty open. I mean, I don't know that I've ever had somebody may say they're not going to give it to me, but usually they'll give it to a faculty member.
If the grant is already concluded, it's 5 years gone by, you're more likely to get it from them than if it's a recent grant and they're afraid of giving away something they haven't done yet.
Yeah. I think, question?
May I have a question? So it looks like when you first apply, you basically say this is the research that I want to do in this 5 year, right? So it looks like you applied several times, and I assume that you continue to do that research during those years. So how does it really work? How did you navigate it when you apply again to the same proposal?
Well, maybe I'll answer first because I have a good answer. So I had a manuscript that was basically practically ready for submission, and so I essentially took those results that we had already not only done the work but really thought through the analysis and the story of what the analysis of the data, the story that those results told. And that formed a large portion of my preliminary data for my proposal, right? So this was on the third time, the successful attempt. So I think, and you can put published, I think you can put published results in a proposal. You have to cite it, of course, but I think unpublished it makes it seem more convincing that it's, a component of the research. And it was still a foundation. It's not like I proposed to do that, right? And that was it. That was really the foundation that we were building from. But since we had not only done collected some preliminary data, but really thought through the analysis. I think that was the important thing, that I thought critically and could tell, didn't give all the details, but could tell a nice, concise, convincing, logical story about what we had done and what we wanted to do. That helped a lot.
Thank you. Other questions?
So, I mean, would it be possible to from at least a few of you get all 3 iterations of your proposals to maybe see how they changed and maybe even get some of the feedback that you received from the rejections? I mean, is that something you would be willing to furnish?
Sure.
I mean, is there a good way
Yeah.
to maybe make that happen?
How about I work with anybody willing to do that, and then we can distribute it out.
Okay. Well, I think that would maybe be helpful to sort of see how proposal evolved, like very specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yes, to see the process. Okay.
Oh, I was wondering if you'll also try to apply to some of the Office of Naval Research or DoD early career or DOE, and if you had a similar proposal or was that something completely different?
I did.
I did, but it was completely different from things that I sent to Navy and DOE. I was hoping to apply to DOE this year, but there hasn't been one. So.
So I applied to the Army Young Investigator, the ONR, the DOE, and the NSF.
Mm-hmm.
And so DOE and NSF, I submitted the same proposal roughly, and I'll be submitting another DOE. The feedback you get is very, very different. So if you go to like DOE, it typically goes out to expert reviewers within your community, so anyone that's in that program. Whereas the NSF, it's panel-based or it's ad hoc, so it's much more nebulous. So the feedback is very, very different. And the level of expertise you can write the proposal at is different as well. So I think figuring out how they do the review process is key to targeting that audience.
This might be going a little off topic, but I also am doing DOE early career and NSF, so can you comment a little bit on the difference between the kind of feedback and the way to target these?
So the DOE, it was very clear that it was sent to experts.
Yeah,
They had
that is
critiques of
clear,
very,
yeah.
specific things that might have been wrong. Whereas the NSF, it was very like, I don't feel like this technology will advance the field or something like that, much more nebulous. So when I write to the DOE, I can do much more technical jargon in there, much more specific experiment descriptions, but still nebulous enough that anyone in that area could understand it.
Do you know any specifics about how, like, they were talking before about these panels for the NSF, is it different for the DOE?
I think the DOE, it sends it out to experts in the area, and then they have a panel discussion.
Okay, so they do end up talking to each other and
Yeah.
like recalibrating.
Yep. And the program officers at DOE have much more influence than they do, let's say, the NSF.
In terms of deciding the priorities for the research.
Yep, yep, they have agendas they're following.
So what were your education plans like? Were you being involved over time since you got in the third, or what did you do?
Well, we'll start with Jan this time.
Okay, I think for me, I usually apply to the NSF and the NIH. So for the same proposal there are some pieces, some aim I use it for the NIH, but a little different perspective. And that's smaller grant, so it works for that one. But because it's 5 years, I make it broader for the career one. So.
And can you, I'm just going to follow on, can you tell me more specifically, she was asking about the education plan. How did you integrate the education plan with your research?
Well, my educational plan, I think before that I get a smaller grant from NSF. It's also called Bridge, and basically I focus on the minority and underrepresented groups like women and the minority people, and also the outreach. And I have industry background, so I have to use that. So I'm setting myself to build the academic industry pipeline. So that's, you have to use what you are good at it. And also, I do suggest you do read the educational literatures just like you normally do for your regular research literature. Citing. You have to have like at least 10 something the educational literature cite as like you do the educational research. As long as you do the first time, the second time, and third time is much easier.
So my outreach, I'm heavily involved in the online chemistry community. So Twitter, Instagram, chemistryblog.com, I write for them regularly. So that was one part of my broader impacts. And then the other part was something we call Ask a Scientist. So the first year I got here to Tallahassee, I don't know if you guys have been to Railroad Square Park on the first Friday. It's basically a bunch of artists, musicians, you know, whoever hanging out. And I showed up there, I'm like, anyone can set up a tent. So we did. We just set up a tent and we have a sign that says Ask a Scientist. And I invite 4 or 5 scientists across all different disciplines to just sit there, drink beer, and talk to the public. And so it's really fun. If you guys are interested in doing it, send me an email because we're always looking for volunteers. But how I tied that into my career proposal was that, I mean, my main contribution to that is as a solar cell expert or as a, you know, solar related, that's what my research is. So talking to the public about that is very easy.
I put a lot of effort into developing my educational outreach plan the very first time I applied. And the feedback I got from reviewers was that it was okay, so I did make some I beefed it up a little bit as in subsequent tries, but no major changes. The first time I really thought through, and there were some nice workshops that brought in all kinds of opportunities for people in the local community and the universities to collaborate, which you can collaborate with for educational outreach. And so mine didn't change a lot, but that's because I put a lot of effort into it the first attempt.
So for me, the educational, so I do robotics, and so one of the things that I think helped with the educational side from my end is that we propose to actually build a robotic platform